This is the third in a series of tutorials for the Anglican Office Book, 2nd edition. This video will present an overview of the use of the Lectionary and the Psalter. The offices of the prayer book tradition, as are given here in the Anglican Office Book, center around the regular praying of the complete Psalter and the regular reading through 4 daily large chunks of Scripture, the whole of the Bible, or at least the most important parts thereof, depending a bit on which lectionary table one uses. To facilitate this, the Office Book contains lectionary tables that give the appointed Scripture readings for any given day of the year. Now, there are 3 tables given in the Anglican Office Book. That of the 1943 American, the original 1549 Book of Common Prayer Lectionary, and the 1962 Canadian Book of Common Prayer Lectionary. Each has their advantages and disadvantages, but it is important to state that the Anglican Office Book foresees that the American 1943 lectionary is that which will be generally used. The first rubrics that we have concerning the 1943 lectionary are on page Roman numeral 22 of the general rubrics. These sections concerning the service of the church and the use of the Psalter and lectionary are lifted straight from the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. In short, it tells us that these following tables govern the Scripture throughout the year, and that there are certain degrees of choice in terms of lengthening or shortening the lessons given to the minister. That is something you should do at your own discretion. The lectionary tables themselves begin following the seasons of the church year. So we have the beginning of the church year, the first Sunday in Advent, as our first series of tables. In the 1943 American lectionary, the readings are laid out facing each other, with the matins or the morning readings on the left page and the evening or evensong lessons on the right page. And so for each day we see the Monday in the first week of Advent has our morning lessons here from the prophet Isaiah and from St. Mark, and our evening lessons here again from the prophet of Isaiah and from the Revelation. It's quite straightforward to follow these tables straight through. There are helpful rubrics that are given whenever there's a particular variation that may occur in the tables. And these tables will be prayed through every year in order. Of note, at the end of the year, in the 1943 American lectionary, there are 3 special weeks given, somewhat corresponding to the ancient St. Martin's Lent it was referred to, which was an extra few weeks prior to Advent. In the 1943 American lectionary, there are 3 Sundays before Advent whose Scripture readings and the readings throughout the following weeks take precedence over whatever Sunday after Trinity may actually be occurring. And so, beginning on the earliest possible date this could happen, which would be the 20th Sunday after Trinity, there's an asterisk with a helpful rubric that lets us know that we should be aware of whether or not we have reached the 3rd Sunday before Advent 1. This is often overlooked in many parishes when the office is read publicly. Now, as far as the other two Psalter tables go, we will find those in the appendix of the book. And the first one that we will find is the 1549 Table of Lessons. Rubrics for it are helpfully given right here. One advantage of the 1549 table is that it follows the civil calendar, not the ecclesiastical calendar. So we do not find our readings based on the season of the church's year, but rather, starting on January 1st, we find the readings laid out for each calendar day. This is helpful when we get to the Psalter later and we discuss how the Psalter works in the Anglican office book. This particular lectionary is also quite heavy on the scripture. As we can see, in almost every case, entire chapters without division are given. In fact, the only time that there is a division in a chapter is in Luke chapter 1. So this makes for quite a heavy and robust cycle of scripture reading. A disadvantage of this lectionary, as far as the Anglican office book is concerned, is that because it follows the civil calendar, the readings do not necessarily match up with the themes of the church's year. Our next lectionary table is that of the 1962 Book of Common Prayer of the Anglican Church of Canada. And this is an excellent lectionary table that works very well with the Anglican office book. It is itself a revision of the English 1922 lectionary and is a wonderful reinterpretation of what we know to have been the ancient breviary lectionary used throughout the Latin Church in the late first millennium. The readings are more substantial than that of the 1943 American lectionary, but without being overburdensome as perhaps the 1549 could be. It is important to note that unlike the plain prayer book office, the Anglican office book provides the various antiphons, hymns, and other supplementary material. So sometimes, if a scripture lectionary is used with very long passages, it can mean that matins and evensong could exceed half an hour in recitation. Again, choose whichever table works best for you and is most congruent with your parish community's use. Finally, we have certain days throughout the year that have a deviation on these lectionary tables. These days are assigned proper psalms and proper scripture lessons to bring out the mystery or the feast celebrated thereon. There are two ways that we know about these particular days. One is at the end of the 1943 lectionary tables, we have a table for the psalms and lessons for these fixed holy days, beginning roughly with the beginning of the church year, which would be Advent 1. So the earliest feast that we have in the church year that would have proper lessons is that of St. Andrew. And we will see that he has his first evensong lessons, his matins lessons, and his second evensong lessons. It is noteworthy here to state that all of the proper lessons given in the 1928 prayer book are found in these tables, and additionally some other feasts of first, second, and greater double rankings. These would also be useful if one is using the 1549 or the 1962 lectionaries. In addition to the scripture readings, the real backbone of the office is that of the Psalter. Psalter beginning after the devotional material section, is classically organized in the prayer book office tradition over 30 days, following the civil calendar. So, for example, on the first calendar day of the month, at morning prayer, would be sung these psalms here assigned in order. On the first calendar day of the month, at evening prayer, would be sung the next group of psalms, and so on and so forth throughout the days. There is also helpfully in the heading indication of what day and whether it is for morning or evening. If one follows the 30-day Psalter, which is the recommended Psalter to use, again keeping in mind that the exceptions to the 30-day cycle would be all first and second class double feasts, as well as most greater double feasts as found in the tables of proper psalms and lessons. So, for example, on Christmas Day, we would never read the psalms given in the Psalter for the 25th day of the month, but rather we would read the proper ones given in the lectionary tables. If there are 31 days in the month, the customary approach is to repeat day 30 in the Psalter at Matins and at Evensong. Now, there are a few other ways provided by the Anglican office book to say the Psalter. Perhaps the most common, besides the 30-day Psalter, is that of the so-called proper daily psalms found in the American 1943 lectionary. Now, this is an innovation as far as prayer book lectionaries are concerned, where every single day of the year is given a proper psalm or two, generally of no more than 20 verses, with the distinction of not praying all of the psalms. This is a great disadvantage of this particular cycle. The imprecatory psalms, or the cursing psalms, and those which were deemed by the sensibilities of the 1920s to be unsuitable for public consumption, are omitted. So if one were to follow this particular cycle, which we do not recommend, the whole of the Psalter will not be read over the course of the year. It also very unhelpfully turns the Psalms into effectively a third short lesson, defeating the entire purpose of the divine office as being an office of praise centered around the daily recitation of the Psalms in an orderly manner. The Anglican office book also provides two other options that are a bit more akin to the classical Western breviary tradition. Now, in the Latin breviary, the Psalms would be read over the course of a week, every week. Now, this would certainly be possible using the prayer book system, but unwieldy, and would tend to render the Psalms a bit too heavy given the amount of content in the rest of the office. So instead, we have provided for a set of tables for 2-week Psalters, where we can have a heavier dose of psalmody at Matins and Evensong that will repeat orderly every 2 weeks instead of every 30 days, as in the ordinary Psalter. The first of these two tables, found on page 208, only assigns all of the psalmody to Matins and Evensong. So this is very much like the classical prayer book 30-day Psalter. It is envisioned that if one uses this particular table, that one will also be using the little hours in the Anglican office book. So you will note that all of the psalms provided for in the little hours of prime, terce, sext, none, and compline are not in this table. So this table will be an incomplete recitation of the Psalter if the little hours are not said. As an alternative, we have another 2-week Psalter, but this one provides a smaller number of psalms to be sung at matins and evensong by making the psalms variable every day at the little hours. Now, this was first done in the Western Rite with the breviary renovations of Pope Pius X in 1911. And here we have followed the same principle. Little hours are kept quite short, no more than 15 to 20 verses on average for each little hours. The great advantage of this system is that one is able to say each of the little hours in generally no more than 4 to 5 minutes, whereas one gets a heavier dose of psalmody that generally follows the old Latin tables of the Psalms at matins and at evensong. Again, this presumes, if you want to have the complete Psalter recited, that you are doing all the little hours every day. And there are some helpful rubrics on both of these pages that explain how this particular psalm table should be used in certain periods of the year, for example, on major feasts and within their octaves. Now, as we said earlier, certain feasts are given proper psalms and proper lessons throughout the year. And there's a helpful cheat in the body of the Anglican office book to let us know that on a given calendar day, there are proper psalms and lessons. So, for example, the upcoming feast, as of this video, of the Nativity of Our Lady on September 8th, we will notice that there is a small red asterisk next to the date. This asterisk indicates to us that this particular feast, beginning at first evensong, has proper psalms and lessons. Now, this asterisk is only provided in the proper of the saints. The proper of the seasons is not necessary to provide such because the lectionary tables have the seasonal feasts, such as Christmas and Easter, already built in, so that a secondary table is not necessary to consult. This ends the third tutorial for the Anglican office book.